Imagine you're, sitting in your living room just reading a book, and suddenly the smoke detector starts blaring,
Which is terrifying.
right? Your heart pounds, your pupils dilate, adrenaline just floods your system. Your immediate, completely undeniable instinct is to find the fire, put it out, or, grab your family and run.
Yeah, because it's a fundamental survival reflex. It's wired into the absolute oldest part of our brain.
Exactly.
An alarm implies an immediate existential threat. The human nervous system is deliberately designed so that you just cannot simply ignore that blaring siren. Your biology demands action.
But what if there is no fire?
Right.
What if the smoke detector is just, malfunctioning and it's screaming at a speck of dust? If you keep acting like there's a real fire, throwing buckets of water everywhere, tearing down the drywall looking for the source, you end up just destroying the house yourself.
You do.
Welcome to today's Deep Dive. We're taking a pretty thick stack of clinical notes, research papers, and case studies to explore a deeply misunderstood area of pediatric mental health.
We're talking about childhood OCD.
Yes, childhood OCD. And for you listening, whether you're a parent trying to navigate a crisis right now, maybe a teacher seeing unexplained behaviors, or, just someone fascinated by how the human brain works, we're going to explore the hidden psychological traps that really well-meaning adults fall into.
And we'll also look at how modern school programs are completely revolutionizing access to specialized care.
So, okay, let's unpack this. The core tension pulsing through all the sources we're looking at today is this sort of paradox.
It's a huge paradox.
It is. It's the fact that sometimes a parent's absolute, most natural, loving instinct is the exact thing throwing gasoline on their child's anxiety.
Yeah, and to understand how loving parents accidentally fuel that fire, we first really have to understand the fire itself.
Right.
We have to completely discard the cultural stereotype of OCD before we can even begin to understand the manifestations we're seeing in these clinical notes.
So let's do that right now. Because when you hear the phrase obsessive-compulsive disorder, the pop culture image that immediately springs to mind is usually someone washing their hands 50 times.
Or maybe a kid meticulously organizing their colored pencils by shade.
Yeah, exactly.
Ooh.
It's portrayed as this quirk of extreme neatness.
And, that behavior can be a manifestation for some, sure, but the research reveals a vastly different, much darker internal reality for many children.
So much darker.
And because it happens entirely inside the child's mind, it often goes completely unnoticed by the outside world until it reaches an absolute crisis point.
Well, here's the most startling fact from the material, I think. Intrusive thoughts in kids do not mean they are bad kids.
No, at all.
The examples documented in these clinical notes they are genuinely tough to read.
They really are.
You have a child who deeply, profoundly loves their pet, right?
Yeah.
And suddenly they are bombarded with recurring violent thoughts about hurting that pet.
Yeah.
Or a kid who absolutely adores their family, suddenly totally paralyzed by terrifying, looping thoughts that something awful is going to happen to them and that it will be their fault.
Put yourself in the shoes of a 7 or 8-year-old experiencing that level of sheer terror.
It's unimaginable.
Children simply do not possess metacognition.
Which is what exactly?
Metacognition is the developmental ability to step back and think critically about your own thinking.
Oh, got it.
Like, adults can have a bizarre, intrusive thought and just dismiss it as a weird misfire, like, oh, that was weird.
Right, you just brush it off.
But to a child, having a violent or terrifying thought feels like a direct reflection of their true character. Their internal logic basically dictates, well, if I thought about hurting my dog, I must secretly be a terrible, dangerous person.
The text provides a brilliant analogy to help visualize this, actually. These intrusive thoughts are essentially mental spam emails.
Yes, the spam folder.
Yeah, you open your email inbox and there's a message in all caps screaming that your bank account has been hacked or, that you've committed a crime.
But you didn't ask for that email.
Exactly. You didn't write it. It isn't a message representing your actual life. It's just junk mail. But the child's brain is misinterpreting that junk mail as an urgent, critically important message from themselves.
And the psychological why behind the specific content of these thoughts is what makes the condition so devastating.
How so?
Well, OCD is an opportunistic mechanism. It essentially scans the child's psychological landscape and specifically attacks the things they value most.
I want to pause on that because that is a massive paradigm shift. The disorder intentionally targets what the child loves.
Yes. The disturbing content of the intrusive thought isn't a dark reflection of some hidden, sinister desire.
Okay.
The clinical term for this is ego-dystonic. It means the thought is entirely inconsistent with the child's actual beliefs, morals, and desires. The thoughts reflect what the child cares deeply about protecting. If a child's highest value is the safety of their family, the brain's threat detection system, which is, remember, malfunctioning, latches onto the concept of the family being harmed.
So it generates these horrific spam emails because that specific scenario is what will trigger the absolute maximum emotional response.
Precisely. The kid is terrified precisely because they love the pet or their family, not because they actually harbor any desire to hurt them.
Right.
The thought only has power because it fundamentally violates their core values.
Okay, so the child is living in a state of sheer terror. Their mental spam folders just overflowing with these horrific, high-alert notifications. So naturally, they run to the closest source of safety. They go to their parents.
Of course they do.
And the instinct for literally any parent is to comfort a terrified child. But the sources reveal this instinct leads straight into a psychological pitfall.
Yeah, we are looking at a dynamic that traps almost every loving adult who encounters it. The child is seeking relief, and the parent is desperate to provide it.
Let's pull a specific scenario from the text to really illustrate this. A child comes up to their mother, completely panicked, and asks for the 50th time that afternoon, "Are you sure I'm not going to hurt the dog? Are you really sure?"
A very common scenario.
Now, reading this, I have to push back a little bit, because isn't comforting a terrified kid literally the foundation of parenting? I mean, parenting 101.
It seems like it, yes.
If a toddler says there's a monster under the bed, you tell them there's no monster and that they're safe.
Right.
So how can looking at a sobbing child and saying, "Hey, it's okay, you're a good kid, you're not going to hurt the dog," how can that possibly be harmful?
We have to look at the mechanics of the disorder. When you answer that question, when you offer that comfort, you do provide relief.
Right.
The child's anxiety plummets. But the clinical data shows that relief only lasts for about 30 seconds.
30 seconds. That's it.
30 seconds of peace before the alarm blares again. It's just enough time for the brain to recalibrate, realize the perceived threat is still technically unresolved, and then trigger the obsession again, often even louder.
Wow.
This is known clinically as the reassurance trap. In the specific context of OCD, reassurance ceases to be comfort. It morphs into a ritual.
A ritual like someone compelled to knock on wood 3 times or flip a light switch to prevent bad luck.
Exactly like that. By answering the child's question, the parent is accidentally teaching the child's brain that the question must be answered in order to feel safe.
Oh, I see.
The child's nervous system learns, okay, I felt like I was in mortal danger, mom answered my question, and then the danger went away. So the very next time that terrifying spam email arrives, the brain demands the ritual.
Quick, go get mom to neutralize the threat.
Right. This locks the child into a continuous, exhausting loop where their tolerance for any internal uncertainty drops to absolute zero.
So the parent thinks they're acting as a shield, protecting the kid from the anxiety. But functionally, they are acting as a battery, just powering the whole cycle.
That's a great way to put it.
The anxiety spikes, the kid asks for the reassurance ritual, the parent performs it, the anxiety drops for 30 seconds, and then spikes even higher because the brain requires another hit of that reassurance.
You are not treating the underlying fear. You are confirming to the child's malfunctioning brain that the intrusive thought was, in fact, dangerous enough to require an intervention. You are validating the broken smoke detector.
That is incredibly counterintuitive, and frankly, it sounds agonizing for a parent.
It's exhausting.
Because if a parent's instinct to comfort only feeds the cycle, they're left entirely powerless at home. You can't just ignore a child in distress. So what is the alternative?
Well, the text gives clear, actionable advice on breaking this loop. First, parents are instructed to absolutely never punish the child.
Right, because the child did not choose these thoughts. You don't punish someone for receiving a spam email.
Exactly. Adding punishment to the equation only introduces profound shame into an already terrifying experience. The child will simply start hiding the obsession, which makes it infinitely harder to treat.
Okay, so no punishment. Second, parents have to stop engaging the reassurance loop. The key distinction in the sources is that parents must validate the child's distress while firmly declining to perform the ritual of reassurance.
And navigating this requires a really delicate tightrope walk. Validating the distress sounds like, hey, I can see your brain is giving you a really scary thought right now, and I know how incredibly hard that feels.
But then declining the ritual sounds like what?
It sounds like But we know this is your OCD talking, and I'm not going to answer that question because answering it only makes the OCD stronger.
Oh, wow.
You offer profound empathy for the physical and emotional feeling of anxiety, but you completely refuse to engage with the actual content of the spam message.
Basically, I see you're scared, but I'm not feeding the monster. That is a massive pivot for a parent to make. It also means the family needs an outside disruptor, right? They need a structural way to rewire the child's brain.
Yes, they do.
Which brings us directly to the clinical solutions outlined in the text. Specifically, the gold standard of treatment, ERP therapy.
Exposure and response prevention. It is the most robust, evidence-based intervention we have for this condition.
The sources describe a process that is highly adaptable and kid-friendly, utilizing stories, games, drawings, and heavy parent coaching. But I want to understand the actual mechanism here.
Okay.
Because when I hear exposure therapy, I picture something out of a psychological thriller, forcing someone to endure their worst nightmare. How does a game function as exposure therapy without just traumatizing the child further?
The mechanism at work here is called habituation. Think of it like jumping into a remarkably cold swimming pool.
Okay, I hate cold water, but go on.
Right. When you first jump in, it's a shock to the system. Your breathing quickens, your body tells you to get out immediately. But if you stay in the water, your body eventually realizes it isn't actually freezing to death.
Yeah, you get used to it.
Your temperature receptors recalibrate, and the water feels normal. ERP forces the brain to stay in the cold water of that terrifying thought until the emotional temperature normalizes.
So instead of avoiding the scary thought or, running to mom for reassurance to get out of the pool,
Yeah.
you actively invite the thought in. You just sit with the uncomfortable feeling.
Yes. The exposure is gently, systematically introducing the child to the thought that triggers the anxiety, scaled to their developmental level, like a therapist might have a child draw a picture of the OCD monster telling them a scary story.
Okay.
The response prevention is the crucial mechanism. It's coaching the child to resist the urge to perform the ritual. They sit in the anxiety until the amygdala, which is the brain's fear center, learns that the thought is harmless.
The brain habituates. The sources state the goal of ERP is for kids to learn to boss back the OCD. They personify it.
Yeah.
They turn it into an external bully rather than an internal flaw.
Yes, which is huge for a kid.
Meanwhile, the parents are being coached on how to support their child without rushing in to rescue them. They transform from bodyguards into cheerleaders, and the clinical data supports this heavily.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources cite a 60 to 70% response rate with full pediatric ERP treatment.
When executed correctly by a trained specialist, the outcomes are incredibly promising. However, the research in our stack throws a major physical caveat into the mix today. Sometimes the mechanics of this anxiety aren't purely psychological or behavioral in origin.
I am so glad we are bringing this up, because I was looking at this medical literature on strep throat in the notes, and my very first instinct reading this was that there had to be a typo.
A lot of people think that.
I mean, we think of strep as a sore throat, maybe a fever, a few days antibiotics. But the sources are explicitly linking a common throat bacteria to sudden onset, severe psychiatric symptoms.
Yes.
Walk me through the mechanism of how a throat infection crosses over into the brain's behavioral center. We're talking about PANDAS, right?
CANDIS, yes. It stands for Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorders Associated with Streptococcal Infection.
That is a mouthful.
It is. And there is a broader category mentioned called PANS, which is Pediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome, covering similar symptoms triggered by other infections or environmental factors. It sounds like science fiction, but the biological mechanism is very well documented.
But how does the immune system cause a psychological disorder?
It's basically an issue of autoimmune friendly fire. The child contracts a standard strep infection, the immune system spins up to fight it, creating antibodies.
Normal so far.
But in these specific cases, the immune system gets confused. Those antibodies cross the blood-brain barrier and mistakenly attack the basal ganglia, a part of the brain intimately involved in movement, emotion, and behavior.
Wow, so the body's defense mechanism is literally attacking the brain's emotional regulator.
Yes. And the hallmark of PANDAS, or PANS, is the speed of the onset. We are not talking about a gradual, subtle development of anxiety over several months. We are talking about a child going to bed fine and waking up the next morning exhibiting explosive, severe OCD symptoms.
Overnight.
Literally overnight. The sources are very clear. If these symptoms appear overnight, especially if accompanied by new motor or vocal tics or immediately following a strep infection, a full medical workup is absolutely warranted.
It is a vital distinction for a parent to recognize. I mean, a sudden, terrifying change in personality might literally be an autoimmune response requiring medical intervention.
Exactly.
But the notes also provide a crucial reassurance here. Whether the OCD is idiopathic, meaning the standard presentation with no known physical cause, or whether it is driven by pandas, the treatment path actually converges.
It does.
It responds exceptionally well to ERP therapy, combined with the appropriate medical care for the infection.
Right. We have established the mechanics of the fear, the danger of the reassurance trap, the biological curveballs, and the highly effective weapon of ERP. But recognizing that a specialized therapy exists is only addressing half the crisis.
Right, because therapy in a vacuum fails if nobody can actually reach it. The sources highlight that accessibility is the true bottleneck in pediatric mental health.
It's the biggest hurdle.
You can have the most effective treatment protocol in the world, but if a desperate family has to sit on a wait list for 6 months, drive 2 hours each way to a specialty clinic, and pay hundreds of dollars out of pocket per session, that treatment functionally does not exist for them.
Which brings us to the systemic solution detailed in our materials. We're looking at an incredibly innovative model operating right now in Georgia called MentalSpace School.
Yeah, this is fascinating.
They have taken the clinical solutions we've discussed and embedded them directly into the K-12 educational framework.
By building the support system inside the schools, they are systematically dismantling those traditional barriers to entry. I mean, the logistics of this operation are remarkable.
You really are.
They provide dedicated therapist teams per school, same-day teletherapy, family counseling, and immediate crisis intervention. And for the school districts worrying about the legalities, it's fully compliant with HIPAA for medical records and FERPA, which protects the child's educational privacy from their peers.
Right.
A parent doesn't have to pull their kid out of math class, lose half a day of work, and drive across town to a doctor's office. The care meets the child where they already are.
The logistical integration is impressive, but we really have to focus on the structural insight regarding the financials, because specialized therapy like ERP is notoriously expensive.
So expensive.
It is often cost prohibitive for the average family, which creates a massive disparity in who gets to recover from these disorders. MentalSpace attacks this cost barrier directly.
What's revolutionary here isn't just the therapy itself, right? It's that they have built a financial safety net wide enough to catch almost any family in the system.
Exactly.
They negotiated with a massive range of private insurers. The notes list: Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, Aetna, United Healthcare, Humana, Peach State, CareSource, and Amerigroup.
That covers a lot of ground.
And beyond private insurance, they made Medicaid effectively free. $0 out of pocket for families on Medicaid.
Removing the barriers of geography and prohibitive cost allows the clinical efficacy of ERP to actually reach the population. And the outcome statistics reported in the sources prove the model's validity.
Let's hear the numbers.
They report a 92% reduction in anxiety and an 85% family satisfaction rate.
Wait, I want to highlight the other statistic in this document too. An 89% improved attendance rate?
That's huge.
That is massive. That means kids who were previously paralyzed at home, completely trapped by their intrusive thoughts, are suddenly back in a functioning classroom. They're getting their childhoods back.
It demonstrates that this isn't just about managing a checklist of symptoms. It is a comprehensive, systemic roadmap for returning a child to their functional life. It takes a deeply isolating neurological loop and provides a clear, highly accessible exit route.
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We tracked the journey from realizing that horrific intrusive thoughts are just brain spam and emphatically not reflections of a child's character.
Yeah.
We explored the counterintuitive danger of the well-meaning reassurance trap and how it acts as a ritual feeding the anxiety cycle.
Yes.
We broke down the mechanics of habituation and bossing back the OCD through ERP therapy, the sudden onset autoimmune curveball of pandas, and finally, how organizations like MentalSpace School are physically and financially dismantling the barriers to this critical care.
It's been quite a journey.
For you listening, we want to make sure you have direct access to the resources mentioned in our source material. There is a free 2-minute pediatric OCD screening available right now at sheettherapy.com/mental health tests.
Highly recommend checking that out.
And if you want to explore this school-based integration model we just discussed, you can find them at mentalspaceschool.com. So what does this all mean?
Well, If we can systematically rewire a child's brain to successfully boss back a monster as internal and terrifying as OCD, it completely reframes our understanding of pediatric resilience. It makes you wonder, what else is a developing human brain capable of conquering, adapting to, and overcoming if adults just provide the right tools and finally stop rushing in to rescue them?